Hi, everyone. This is Callie and Joan from Q&A, a podcast by President Lincoln's Cottage.
While we're having exploratory conversations for the show, we sometimes end up with interesting bits that don't quite fit in the main episode, but we don't think that should keep you all from hearing them.
This bonus episode accompanies episode 8.2, Weren't They Friends? So if you haven't listened to that one yet, it might be a good place to start.
I asked Jon White and Lucas Morel what, in the course of putting their book Measuring the Man together, was the most surprising thing they had learned about Frederick Douglass.
Biggest surprise was fairly candid remarks he made about the prospects for Black Americans, especially after the Civil War, under the new president, Andrew Johnson. Johnson is, if not the worst president in American history, among the worst, like bottom 2 or 3. But what Douglass expressed to a British abolitionist, someone he had corresponded over time with, within days of the assassination, first, of course, his grief, tremendous mourning, along with the rest of America, that he had lost not just a great president, but a man he considered his friend. But to this British audience, this was someone he knew was going to release his remarks to the paper. And he knew what he was going to say was going to be released to a British audience. But what he didn't say to an American audience was he thought Andrew Johnson would be a better president for Black Americans than Lincoln would have had he not been murdered. And the reason for that is because of these meetings he had with Abraham Lincoln, he learned what a great person he was in terms of his character, honesty, integrity, amiability, affability. And he said those things were crucial to keep the loyal American public together to win a war. But those would actually hinder him as president at a time when the South didn't need kindness. They needed, as he put it, loyal wrath. They needed punitive measures. They needed to be punished for what they did to the country in terms of money, in terms of blood, all the lives lost. And he thought Andrew Johnson had always lived in a slave state. He knew the planter class, what was known at the time as the slave power. And he says, those guys are going to survive emancipation. They're going to survive what would become the 13th Amendment, the abolition of slavery. He just suspected they're going to get back into power at the state level, and we need a firm hand at the federal level to protect the rights of Black people. Frederick Douglass actually thought, wow, Johnson, now that he's going to be president, he's going to make sure we're equal in a post-Civil War America, and especially for Black males, which was the only possibility at the time, they're going to get the vote under Johnson. And so he thought the very things that endeared him to Lincoln personally would make him a weak president at a time where they needed a strong one.
Douglass thought Johnson might be less flexible and understanding than Lincoln, in other words. But as you probably know, things turned out differently than Douglass had hoped.
In the summer of 1865, Douglass begins to see that Johnson is acting better towards ex-Confederates than ex-slaves. And he really sees that in the fall as Johnson continues to pardon former Confederates. In February of 1866, Douglass and other Black men actually go to the White House to meet with Johnson. And a number of these Black delegates had met with Lincoln earlier during the war. So they're going back to the White House thinking they'll be welcomed in a way that Lincoln had welcomed them. And to be sure, they were welcomed in to have a meeting with Johnson. But whereas Lincoln was really welcoming and kind and listening towards his Black visitors, Johnson was rude and condescending. In fact, after Douglass and his friends left, Johnson said that Douglass was like any other N-word who would slit a white man's throat. And Douglass had pushed Johnson in this meeting on giving Black men the right to vote, and Johnson just would not hear of it. And a couple days later, about a week later, Douglass goes to the U.S. Capitol to deliver a speech in honor of Lincoln's birthday. And in that speech, Douglass talked about his meetings with Lincoln and how kind and listening Lincoln had been. And juxtaposing Lincoln with Johnson, Douglass said that, unlike Johnson, Lincoln didn't begin as a Moses and end as a Pharaoh. In other words, Johnson said, I will be your Moses, but really he's the guy keeping Black people in bondage.
And Kevin Bryant, a park ranger at the Frederick Douglass site, shared with us one of his most telling stories about the separation Douglass had to keep between his personal and professional lives.
It reminds me of a similar type of idea that Frederick Douglass encountered at his home, where he's in one of the parlors of his house and he's playing with his granddaughters. and they're braiding his hair, putting like ribbons and bows. And this beautiful moment that for so many of us would just be like an incredible thing to see and like realize like this is a grandpa, this is a dad, this is a friend. But at the same moment, he's having this beautiful experience with his granddaughters. A journalist knocks on the front door. And nowadays I could see it where the journalist is ushered in and the journalist's story kind of starts with, the playful grandfather here and then kind of settling in, showing that Douglas knows that's not how that's going to get portrayed in a 19th century context. So prior to even allowing this journalist to come into the home, so the family has to go run cover, like, he'll be here in a minute. He's busy right now. They have to run upstairs, get all the braids out, throw the ribbons in the bows because he has to look perfect in that moment. And while he met the journalist's expectations to get that serious interview with the statesman, I wonder about the psychological implications of that for the granddaughters. They're two saying the fun that we were just having isn't fun enough for the world to see. Our grandpa didn't want us to see his work or see our work on his hair. Again, I have no evidence of that, but just, kids are very perceptive.
Yeah.
When things are like that. And you're like, oh, we'll do this one silly thing when it's there, but I'm not going to do this silly thing if there's this other parent watching a school drop off. And that's kind of what happened. Grandpa have fun with you, but grandpa can't have that same sort of fun with the braids, with the public watching. And again, that's where we lose so much of what might have been in this story were it to come in a later era when hopefully society would be a little bit more acceptable of hearing those humanizing moments because we're all humans.
I know I always look for environments in which I can be my full self because keeping up that kind of separation can be a ton of work.
Thanks for listening, and we always appreciate it when you tell a friend about the show. We'll see you again in a week with our next full episode. This episode was produced by me, Joan Cummins, with Callie Hawkins, Haley Bryant, and additional support from the President Lincoln's Cottage team. Music for Q&A was written, performed, and is copyrighted by Clancy Newman.
Q&A is made possible by listeners like you. You can support the show by joining Team Lincoln at lincolncottage.org, where you can also check out our other online and in-person programming. You can reach us at podcast@lincolncottage.org.
President Lincoln's Cottage is a home for brave ideas. Stay curious.